Hi guys, welcome to Kingdom Conversations. Before we get into tonight's broadcast, I want us to share a few thoughts that will put us in the correct frame of mind to understand what we're dealing with. You see, we've been having this discussion around the power to create wealth, which truly is our covenant right as sons in the kingdom. In the last broadcast, we spoke about the 4 parameters within which a kingdom business operates. And that's a very important idea. But you know what? It's one thing to know the parameters, but if you don't know where those parameters are being applied, you'll keep the parameters to yourself and you'll be able to function in any particular environment. Now, what is also crucial, we all know that in this season, we've spoken a lot about the Issachar dimension, understanding the times and the seasons and knowing what we ought to do. So the idea is what we ought to do is in the 4 parameters, but the times and the seasons have to be understood also so that we function in the right context. Now, as we continue to look at this idea, I want us to really understand why is it that we keep now bringing in these recordings that we did. Some of these recordings actually were done early 2020, but the relevance to their reality, they were truly prophetic in nature, is appearing now. And when we look at this, it's almost like God put something in place, and as we look back and see those things unfolding, we need to unpack what those things were saying so that we're able to apply them in our current environment. So as we look at, and as we pay attention to the recording we're about to enter into, there's a core scripture I want us to keep in mind, because that scripture is going to create a framework for us to interpret where we are. And this is Joel 3, 9 to 10. This is a scripture we all know. In fact, many times it has been quoted. The problem has been the context. In fact, so many people can quote this offhand or in bits, depending on which part you hold on to. Usually verse 9 is not very well known, but the rest is quite well known. And of course, in verse 9 where it says, "Proclaim this among the nations, prepare for war, wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near, let them come up." So verse 9 is a war cry. It talks about proclaim this among the nations. A decree is being made in the nations. The nations, in those nations, we are saying prepare men for war. But those men are in the nations, but they happen to be asleep. Wake up the mighty men. Let the men of war. So they are mighty men, but they are asleep. Let them come up, a shift of movement. Usually, verse 10 is what we know, that says, "Beat your plowshares into swords, and your pruning hooks into spears, and let the weak say, I'm strong." Now, this is another interesting one. You need to understand the context. Okay, we say, beat your plowshares. What is a plowshare? A plow usually is something you use when you're dealing with a field. So, metaphorically, we can say this has to do with what's your field of operation. Where do you operate in? Whatever you operate in, where your plowshare is, in other words, which field you function in, your area of operations, beat the tools you use there into swords. Interesting. Plowshares deal with the earth, swords deal with the enemy. So we have an enemy we are up against, but realize that enemy is not people. Our enemies, people, are poverty, lack, all the issues that the enemy has put in place against our covenant. So beat it into a sword, and your pruning hooks into spears. In other words, whatever, if you function, fishermen, interesting, pruning hooks. Those are the ones who use pruning hooks, where they clean up the fish. So cleaning up the fish, notice the word pruning hook, not just a hook. A pruning hook is something that cleans something into spears. That talks about processing. So it's warfare, but it has a lot of processing. And then it says, let the weak say, I am strong. Where we all come from, let the weak say, I am strong, has to do with just the weak. Which weak? The weak here are those who've been asleep. These are the mighty men. When you're not functioning in this context, you are weak. Again, the word weak has power here, because it simply means this: operate by faith prophetically. Let the weak say, I am strong. They are supposedly in the present weak, but they're supposed to shift that present position and change it and say, I am strong, not I will be strong. Because if you don't see yourself as strong, you will not arise. You will not wake up. You will not deal with what we're dealing with. Now, this scripture has to be understood in its context because it came at a time where, if you read the book of Joel, it talks already post the outpouring of the Spirit, post dreams and visions, which have already been understood and interpreted. So the key is, if we understand this, we'll understand that recently we spoke about the place of sleep and slumber in biblical context, and the place of laziness. If you take that and connect it to this, you will now understand what it means by sleep. It means that arise from that scenario we call sleep and laziness, which is, what did we call laziness? The inability to process, the inability to roast. Arise and move into that process. Arise, because this is a time for war. It's very interesting. A war has been declared. Now, this gives us a clearer meaning of the word wake up. Because if a little sleep and a little slumber, poverty comes, then wake up means poverty goes. You can see how those two contexts begin to move. In the nations, this word is being declared to the nations. So business becomes the arena of war. It becomes a new place where we are working in a strategic manner. This war is not fought conventionally. This war is fought in the arena of economy. And that's why you have to be strong. What does it mean to be strong? It means you can no longer be waylaid by the parasite mentality. You can't be waylaid by being bound by mammon. You can't be waylaid by the things that make you weak. It's time to move with a faith-filled prophetic mindset. The ability to move forward with greater power. So, it's time for you to wake up as a mighty man. So as you listen to today's broadcast, and you re-listen to it in last week's, it's time for you to wake up as a mighty man. So this is not you sluggard wake up. No, this is you mighty man. Wake up. It's time for war. So I would say, get a pen, get paper, and prepare for war.
We continue to describe the emerging landscape of our new normal, or the business unusual as we call it. It is important to note that ignorance of emerging realities could be the downfall of many businesses in the near future. Now, kingdom business people can no longer be ignorant of the social, geopolitical impact of whatever nation or sphere they intend to carry their businesses in. Now, my name is Susan Opiyo, and my co-host?
My name is Charles Opiyo.
Now, to deal with these emerging realities, kingdom businesses need to ask themselves, are there any answers in the Bible that we can look at?
Actually, there are. The only issue we have is that, unfortunately, for a long time, we've grown up in an environment where our focus of anything happening has been what we call monastic.
Okay.
Monastic meaning we reason from within the church walls. And we can only reason things from a ritualistic, or what I call Levitical mindset.
So you're talking about monastic and
Yes.
Levitical.
Yes.
Let's
Now,
go back to those two words
yes,
again.
those two words. Monastic means shutting away from the world.
Okay.
Living in a monastery, thinking that the world will just go away. Let's wait for heaven. Let's sit in here.
You're isolated from the world.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the second is Levitical. Those who keep you in the monastery. The ones who keep talking about heaven in the future. Everything is going to happen one day. The world is evil. Now, with that kind of thinking, no matter how you look at Scripture, you will be unable to cope with those changes you've just mentioned. So we have to look at the Bible and remove those perspectives. And the best way to remove those perspectives is to read the Bible with the mindset that God covers everything. And so we need to look at Exodus chapter 1.
Okay.
In Exodus chapter 1, we'll begin to see the realities that are in place concerning such an
Now,
environment.
remember, we are talking about socio-geopolitical impact.
Yes.
And that is where we are looking at the Bible to see what would happen if one
Yes.
is ignorant
Yes.
of such a thing. Now, Exodus 1:8. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, look, the people of the children of Israel, they are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen in the event of war that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land.
Continue to verse 11.
Okay. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses.
Now, if you don't see that in the sight of how many matters are there, that is, there's political activity there.
Yes.
There's geopolitical activity. There's social activity. So what is happening? The Bible says when they came a Pharaoh who knew not
Joseph.
Joseph. That's a political shift. A government has changed.
Now, let's go back maybe for this one person who is watching
Yes.
to understand now that particular statement of
Yes.
there came a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Joseph was there.
Yes.
Sent by God, we know that.
Exactly. The background of the story we know, Joseph has been here. He's had such favor because of God.
Yes.
In fact, Egypt has prospered because of Joseph. All right? And the Israelites have now gotten used to living in this environment. Now, if you went back to the last chapter of Genesis, which speaks about how Joseph dies.
Yes.
And when Joseph dies, he talks about they will live, meaning a warning, an
Carry
insight.
my bones when
Carry
you
my
leave.
bones with you when you go.
Yes.
Things are about
To
to
change.
change this environment, so you have to anticipate. You will see how those qualities become important. This is going to be like our core scripture to see how to prepare
Yes.
for a different season. So what happens when there came a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph? That's a political statement.
Okay.
That means government change. Government change means economy change. Economy change means status change. All those are matters. So people, obviously in Joseph's time we can speculate that many Israelites might have had very good positions of function.
Oh, yes,
And
because we
opportunities.
know that
Yes.
when they came
Yes.
into Egypt, they were even given a land called Goshen.
A special
They were
place
in
to
a
live.
specific place that did not get affected
Exactly.
by anything that happened in Egypt. They were living on a different
Thank
economy,
you.
yet
Thank you.
in Egypt.
So that one statement, a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph, is a world in itself.
Can we take that they say to the business person
Yes.
that a time comes when the same statement applies to you?
Yes.
That there's something called a time comes when a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph.
Comes.
Maybe you can explain that in our terms today.
Let's take anything. Let's
Yes.
take Africa, and currently, at the time of this recording, we are heading towards an American election. Carries the same impact. What if you're the biggest supplier of a current government? What if your business depended on the policies of a particular political candidate? What if everything you did was based on who is in charge? Your future plans
Yes.
were in line with that.
And let's again say here that when you talk about a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph,
Yes.
take the same case and ask yourself, COVID-19 comes.
Thank you.
That's a Pharaoh.
Who knew not
Does
Joseph?
not respect your former position.
Exactly.
Because you could be the supplier of food in a school.
Yes.
And then COVID happens and the school closes down.
Everything
What will
changes.
you do?
Yes.
We talk about suppliers to the airline industry.
There you
COVID
go.
happens.
There
and
you
the
go.
whole system changes.
Yes.
Now that is what we are calling a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph.
Yes.
A system that comes up, a person or a system that has no consideration of the past.
Oh,
Of what
yeah,
happened
we can
before.
talk about an environment
Yes.
that distorts the familiar.
That's a good one.
Moves away from what was normal.
Okay.
What you had accepted as life, what you had put your future plans on, what you had put your strategies on, everything shifted.
So talking about socio-geopolitical, we are talking about
Yes.
shifts that can affect how you do business.
Yes.
Are you prepared? Because every time there's this shift, there's always an impact. And
Exactly.
we want to discuss the impact.
Exactly. And so this scripture shows us how when that shift happened, there was a shift in policy.
Oh, yes.
There was a shift in strategy. Said, you know what? In case these people become mightier than us, that means they're already prosperous.
Oh, yes. They're increasing.
Yes.
Okay.
If they become mightier than us and become our enemies, let us give them a new assignment, a new task. These guys became task masters.
Masters,
Simply
yes.
means somebody is now the one defining your activity.
Yes.
They gave them new tasks. Obviously, because they said, let's deal shrewdly with them. Shrewd sometimes means you are not aware you're being used.
Remember, you're talking about you. We are saying you are the
Yes.
business person here. And you are saying that as we read this scripture, when you look at it, locate yourself
Yes.
in the scripture and
Yep.
ask yourself, if this is me,
Yes.
what are we saying?
Yes.
What is the Bible warning
Absolutely.
me to do? I like that statement that
Yeah.
when we talk of taskmasters,
Yes.
they are now being given a new task that
There you
takes
go.
them from their identity. They cannot
Exactly.
see themselves now
Exactly.
based on the new thing they're being told
And,
to do.
and there's a catchphrase.
Yeah.
Lest they become mightier. So the new tasks are specific. You must never become mighty.
No,
You must
join the
never become
enemy.
great.
Yes.
So today you could be engaged in reacting to shifts. That's a problem.
Okay.
In reacting to shifts, you might end up doing something that puts you in slavery and bondage. What does that mean? It means you can't stop doing it, but it only makes enough for you to eat. So you are stuck, you're defending it, the season of it has ended, it has now become a place of bondage.
So now you're a slave where you're
Yes.
living just for the now.
Exactly.
Just for today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, why is that important? It's important because we're about to enter a new environment.
Yes.
This environment that is emerging that we're calling the new normal, business unusual.
Unusual, yes.
That new environment will have new boundaries, new activities, and new operations.
Yes.
And we need to define some of the core components of those
that whole.
boundaries.
Now, when we
Yeah.
talk about entering a landscape that is
Yes.
defined by borders
Yes.
of course, new ideas.
Yep.
That's what we're talking about.
Yes.
We're talking about disruptive
Yeah.
technology, not
Yes.
destructive, disruptive
Yes.
technologies. And of course, emerging behaviors. Those
Yes.
three things
Yes.
are defining where we are entering.
In fact, I really want people to think about those three things very, very closely. New ideas.
Yes.
The idea of a new idea means never existed before. New idea is not just something creative. That new idea is being driven by something we call disruptive technology. Today, things we never thought were possible have become important.
They have just become normal,
Yes.
the way we operate.
Things we probably argued against have become our functionality, which
Yes.
means new ideas and disruptive technologies equal new behavior.
Oh, yes. So you shape the thinking
You
of
change
the people,
how you did everything.
how people do things.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's preempt something by looking at what COVID has done. COVID has forced us to behave in a strange manner. Work is no longer a place.
Oh, yes.
Work is not a facility. Your-
Productivity is not based on the facility
Or
or
time.
location
Yes.
or time.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's new ideas, disruptive technologies, new behavior.
behavior.
Those are three components we're really going to emphasize in this particular environment.
Oh, yes.
But what is driving those three things? There are certain changes, certain activities, certain operations that are driving the three things. And like I'll keep saying this till it stays in your head. New ideas, disruptive technologies, new behavior. No matter how many times we say this, keep that in your head. It will keep you in context, because where we are going to speak today may sound a bit heavy or complex, but in reality, we are just defining the parameters inside of these three dynamics.
So when you talk
Okay.
about this, of course, this results in exponential rate
Yes.
of development.
Yes.
That's what you're talking
Yeah.
about.
Those things
Now,
cause explosions.
Yes.
Yes.
And look at different areas like computer power increase.
Yes.
All right. Let's talk of storage capacity.
Yes.
Let's talk things like communication speeds, data
Yes.
transmission bandwidth.
Yes.
Look at all these things that are being
Yeah.
affected.
You see, all those things, let's take an example
Okay.
to show the power of that. Just those things you said. Computer,
Power increase.
power increase.
Yeah,
It can
storage.
do more.
Yes.
Its storage capacity is higher.
Communication
Speeds are higher,
Yes.
and data transmission is
Bandwidth.
better because of bandwidth.
Yes.
Let's just take all that alone can be summed up in one word: Zoom. With Zoom, all those factors matter.
Yes.
Without those factors, had there been a disruption of work, there would have been no change of behavior.
And we know in this season
Yes.
of COVID-19,
Yes.
Zoom has made things really work.
Absolutely.
Because at home, all this, of course, put
Yes.
together,
Yes.
work continued.
Yeah, so the truth is, Zoom as the software
Yes.
is useless without these
Without.
four components.
Let's go through the components again. Computer power increase,
Yes.
storage capacity,
Yes.
communication speeds, and
Yes.
data transmission bandwidth.
Absolutely. Those four things have made it possible for a technology like Zoom to make sense. Because if the speeds were not there, you didn't have good bandwidth.
Yes.
Your computer didn't have the necessary speed. You didn't have the capacity to transmit, because to transmit video,
Yes.
you need processing power. To transmit good video, you need good speeds.
Yes.
To transmit with good speeds, you need good bandwidth.
Bandwidth.
So it's just a cyclic activity that tells you that these things have now reshaped our behavior.
Yes.
All right? That meant just those things I'm saying alone have other ramifications.
Okay.
Ramifications like training. Ramifications like you have to learn what you hated.
Remember, this is just because of a social
Exactly.
geopolitical shift
Exactly.
that has caused all this.
Yes.
And remember, like we keep saying, this was not planned. When you talk
It was
about
not
a season
planned.
like now,
It
it was
happened.
not a planned season.
Exactly.
When it happens,
Yes.
as a kingdom business person, are you
Yes.
stranded?
Aha.
Or are you flexible
Exactly.
to move into this?
You see, one of the things we say
Yeah.
in my other environment called futurism,
Okay.
we say this. We say that technologies are developed, but nobody pays attention until they must be used.
Say that again.
Technologies continue to be developed,
Oh, yes.
but nobody pays attention to those technologies until they have to use them. When it is time to use them, nobody spends time trying to find out the mechanics of the technology.
We want solutions.
They just want to use it.
I want to get the results.
And that is why, as we will go ahead, it determines, are you in business to develop technology? Sometimes it's a thankless task. You're just doing it. Nobody has found use for it yet. But a situation will arise where suddenly it will become key
So
and
as a
important.
kingdom business person, you're talking to them about that.
Yes.
Where you're doing these thankless tasks.
Yes.
You need to do it prophetically.
Do it anyway.
Because nobody could have
Anticipated. Yes.
COVID-19 and its impact. Because
Exactly.
right now, we could be talking about the disease,
Yes.
the virus,
Yes.
the hospitalization and
Absolutely.
the deaths.
Yes.
But many people are not seeing the impact yet because
Yes.
that is the next crisis. So when we talk about a crisis, we're talking about there's a crisis coming.
Yes.
The impact of COVID-19.
Absolutely.
Now, there could be a technology that you're working on today
Yes.
that will be needed then.
Now,
but like you're saying,
that's why I love Joseph.
yes,
Because that's Joseph. Joseph interprets a dream. He
Yes.
sees a future crisis. In fact, it's good that he sees a future boom and then a future crisis, which means he's able to plan for both.
oh yes,
To plan for the boom and to plan for the crisis. What does he do? He develops technology.
yes,
They stored grain
that is required then.
in the future.
Okay,
At the time he's developing it, there is no problem.
Yes.
We can go back to, like I said, if you stop reading the Bible from a monastic perspective, you'll keep seeing it.
Yes.
Noah has insight on a future crisis. He builds a technology. It's called the ark,
oh yes,
which can preserve people in the future crisis.
Yes.
So if we have all those patterns,
so we've already seen so many patterns.
Yes.
We need to ask ourselves now,
Yes.
are we the Noahs or
Aha.
the Josephs? Is
Yes.
God seeing us and saying, I want to give you a technology? Or are we
Yes.
despising the ark because we can't understand what the rain is?
now let me pause here and say one of the reasons why the church has struggled with advancing in this way is two windows.
Okay.
One window is the idea of we will exit.
Yes.
Therefore, we do not need any technology.
Yes.
The second window is we need to survive now and no interest in the future. These are two parameters that keep you confused because you don't want anything you can't use now.
Yes.
If somebody is trying to innovate on something that will be for
Because we
tomorrow.
become a microwave generation that
Yes.
wants instant profit.
Exactly.
We are driven by profit,
Yes.
not innovation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so we misinterpret scriptures like one day at a time. We think one day at a time means live only for today. One day at a time means make the most of today.
Yes, because of a
The
better
future.
tomorrow, yes.
That's the difference.
Always
So-
coming up with solutions for tomorrow.
Today.
Not thinking about yourself.
Yes.
Because if you're limited to yourself,
You want to survive.
cannot innovate.
Exactly.
Yes.
So
Well, I mean, I'm seeing like we're beginning to feel the impact
Yes.
of the collision of being between two worlds.
Yes.
And of course, the impact is beginning to show in our
Yep.
day-to-day
Yep.
lives.
Yes.
Every day.
and you know, the two worlds that you're alluding to, we need to really look at them. It's called the
Let's-
analog world
Yes.
and the digital world.
Yes.
This is a major collision, and I'd like to say this. Those two worlds are not colliding. It is two mentalities from those two worlds that are colliding, and that's where our problem is.
I've written something here that we have
Yes.
begun to increasingly live in a digitally empowered world run by analog mindsets. I think we need to talk about that. Digitally empowered world
Yes.
run by analog
Mindsets. Remember where I went back?
Yeah.
To the idea of technology developed and people who only use it when they have to, as
Yes.
opposed to finding use for the current technology.
Yes.
You see, so the analog world works this way. There's a generation that was born analog.
Describe them so that if somebody is watching, they're in business,
Yes.
they need to identify and say, remember you're talking about
Yeah.
locate yourself.
Yes.
Somebody needs to say, I am of digital mentality
Exactly.
or analog mentality.
Yes.
Maybe you need to talk about the analog mentality.
Let's have these two scenarios.
Yeah.
Analog people were people who were born in the era where everything was hardware, so to speak. Hardware meaning paperwork, certificates, printing,
Everything is
had to be physical and everything had to have a face-to-face.
Yes.
In other words, you had to go line up in a government facility to wait for a document.
Yes.
When you got the document, you went from window 1 to window 10.
Yes.
You spend the whole
you
day
can't
there.
skip.
You can't skip.
Because the paperwork is required in this whole process.
And you hope the person at window 3 is at work today.
Yes.
You know, that's the one we are calling
That is the analog, yes.
Exactly. If the person who is to be seen is not available, nothing moves. Yet the person you want to see that you've waited for 4 hours is to sign something.
Yes.
In other words, think about the chaos of that. And we made it such a big deal then. Now we're living in a world where you can go online, get certification, get it digital, download it, print it, finished.
Yes.
I mean, for example, we know in Kenya, you can now set up a company at home.
Yes.
And complete it. Those days you had to find a lawyer's stamp, go to show them the building, then they have to send somebody to confirm you have an office. That is an analog world.
So talking about digital and analog, because now we can, anyone watching can
Yes.
say, seriously, I'm still working analog. In the sense of everything about you is manual.
Exactly.
Everything about you is come from point A, go to point B.
Yes.
Where we are saying now, I just need to go online.
Absolutely.
I don't need to go out.
Exactly.
You know?
And
so we are talking about collision of
these two worlds. And
yes.
now we have a problem, like I said, where leaders who are running organizations, running facilities, are still more analog, but the technology they're supposedly working with is digital.
Okay.
Let me show you a real clash in that world. I'll use an example. For some of you in different countries, it might be the same thing, but in Kenya, I'll give you an example. A lot of the civil servants in Kenya, majority, were born analog. They were employed analog.
Yes.
They've been working on analog systems for a long time. When COVID-19 hit, and people had to start working from home, we had a crisis.
Oh, yes.
Because now do you start teaching them how to use Zoom now?
Do we have the time?
Do you have the time?
Yet, like we are saying, the analog mindsets dominate aspirations and decision making.
Absolutely.
So this person you are talking about is going to be working at home.
Yes.
But they're the decision makers.
Exactly.
Yet they are not digitally empowered.
Yes, and because analog thinking is linear.
Okay.
Step 1,
Yes.
step 2, step 3. It's not solution-based.
In fact, with that,
It is
analog,
step-based.
with analog, the first step is,
Yes.
did you walk into the office before 8?
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
They are linear, like you're saying.
Yes.
First of all, you must report at 8.
There you go.
You get, so step
Yes.
by step.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so what has ended up happening, in that system, the struggle is going to become obvious. The struggle between systems, organizations is becoming obvious for the simple reason that if you have leadership that is linear in thinking, they have what you call, what we are happy to call old school. When the only good old school thing should be music. Nothing else should be old school.
Yes.
Because the mentality of that person who was brought up that way, they got authority by visibility, not by accomplishment.
Let's say that again, because that is where many people are stuck.
Yes.
If you're coming from the analog,
Yes.
your value is in visibility.
Yes.
Your value is in your title.
Absolutely.
Your value is in your experience, number of years you've worked.
Exactly.
You get into digital and this whole thing is just dismantled. Talk of disruption.
Yes. Because suddenly nobody wants to see you.
Yes.
People want to see things done.
Yes. We want to see the solution.
Now we have a problem. And you see, let me say how bad the analog system is. 98% of politics in Africa is analog.
Oh, yes. Yes.
You still think you get value from crowds. You still think you need to go and have this huge campaign with crowds showing up because the analog system means we have seen you, therefore we support you.
Yes.
When that's not a reality anymore.
And actually, it's even worse when you think of this person who is coming to see the young people, because in that crowd are the young people.
Absolutely.
Now, what are you transmitting, if I may use that statement? What are you transmitting to the next generation?
Now, here is what we're saying the problem is. Remember, we said we are dealing, where is the collision? The collision is with analog mindsets in a digital world, because we are still developing digital mindsets. We've not developed them yet.
Yes, we are still developing.
We are still developing digital mindsets.
Okay.
So let's not assume that if somebody is young, they are digital. No.
But we should be developing them in that young age.
Exactly. There are many young people
Who are analog.
who are analog.
Actually, that should be said. See,
Yes.
if you're talking about kingdom, I
Yes.
think that is some. You know, when you talk about curses,
Absolutely.
people think curses is when I don't have this and I don't have
No.
that. A curse is when you are digital, a very young person
Yes.
behaving analog.
You're already cast.
You're already cast because you're thinking the past.
Absolutely.
You can't have solutions for the
You're
future.
thinking of a past that will never change into a future.
Yes.
So therefore, you still, young people, run to rallies to be told how you'll be created for jobs. Which ones? The person who wants to create you a job is analog.
Yeah, so what kind of a job?
So what kind
can
of
he
job
create?
will he create for you? An analog job. Do you need an analog job with the digital world? It doesn't make sense.
Yes.
So we have this mindset that is driving a lot of people, and the conflicts now, some people, this conflict we're talking about can even be personal.
Oh, yes.
Internal, because you're dealing with things you are against, but they are working anyway.
They are.
They don't care if you agree with them or not. They are working. Listen, let's take anything. Africa is now prolific with what we call courier services.
Yes.
Motorcycle courier services. That so-called service system would be useless without digital.
Because it is through the
mobile app.
That
Yes.
I ordered something
Absolutely.
that this person needs to deliver.
Exactly.
Okay.
So suddenly, the mobile app defined the business. There are people who had to learn how to ride a motorbike.
Yes.
But before they did that, they had to learn how to use an app.
Because they need to be contacted.
Like we said,
Yes.
technology until it must
Be used.
be used. That's when it is adopted as if it is the obvious.
Yes.
And so this is the first battle line we have to deal with. If you're going to be a kingdom business person in this new season, the first line you must understand is that we live in a digitally driven world. So it doesn't matter what you're doing.
And if you want to stay relevant,
Yes.
you have to actually come to a place of shift, paradigm shift.
Absolutely.
Where you have to start telling yourself, I've done business like this for
Yes.
40 years. You realize now where we are coming. When you
Exactly.
talk of analog, the pride was we have been doing the same thing
Yes.
for the last 100 years.
Absolutely.
Not anymore.
Absolutely. In fact, that's where you get pride from. That's where the power of your importance is.
Yes.
Why do you want to change this? We've always done
Done
it
things.
this way.
Yes.
So it means that the questions that are asked in an analog world are very different from the questions asked in a digital world.
Oh, yes.
In an analog world, the questions you will hear like, who told you? In a digital world, they'll be asked, why did you? Two different questions.
Oh, yes.
Two different. In other words, the why did you of the digital world is not an attack. It's a query. But the why did you of a digital world is how dare you?
How could you go outside of the boundaries set?
Nobody cares that you solved the problem.
Yes.
You disobeyed the protocol.
Whether you brought a solution or not.
It's not important.
Notice the collision we're talking about of two worlds, digital and analog.
Yes.
Yeah?
And so, in an analog world, if you're selling a product, you will be stuck in, it is a good, beautiful product. In the digital world, you'll ask, is it a useful product?
How relevant is this?
Simple.
How relevant is this?
Two completely different clashing
Notice
realities.
now we are saying new ideas. We're in a
Yep.
season where we're talking about new ideas, which cause, of course, disruptive technologies.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
Which affect behavior. Talking to your own self and saying, I'm in business as a kingdom person. Have I realized the shift that just occurred?
Yes.
Have I realized that we're in a new season where I need to do things differently,
Absolutely.
not how they have always been done?
Yep.
Now, sometimes you need to sit back and know that you cannot get these new ideas in the same place, same plane
Yep.
where you've always been.
Absolutely.
You need to go a notch higher.
Yes.
And this is what we are calling kingdom business, business unusual. We continue talking about socio-geopolitical shifts and impact. And of course, we are saying that these are defined within the borders of new ideas, disruptive technologies, and emerging behaviors. Now, when you look at the challenge, for those not raised with a digital mindset, it is to learn how to evolve and compete in the new landscape.
Yes, and I
Now,
mean, yeah.
what are some of these challenges?
Yes, that's a major challenge because you see, like you said, if you're born analog, you think analog. It's your reasoning, it's your perception. And so suddenly you have to change how you think, and that's a crucial issue. People have to change how they think even before they change how they do.
So you're saying that in a time like this,
Yes.
we continue talking, of course, analog versus digital, and you're
Yes.
saying that in the analog
Yes.
mentality,
Yes.
you're saying this person has a calling
Absolutely.
to stop everything they are
Absolutely.
doing and get relevant.
Completely.
Yes.
Realize the world changed. It's like learning a new language.
Yes.
Everything changed. You can't force your old thinking on this.
Yes.
And you see where you came from, you got quality from the experience you had. In the digital world, your experience could be a hindrance.
Okay.
Everything is changing.
Yes.
And we can look at one of the issues. Let's look at the governmental level, for example. And I'll go back some years ago because of technology we were involved in, when what then was called calling over the internet.
So are you saying, by giving that example, are you saying you were born analog?
Absolutely.
And you had to shift it to digital?
In fact, I became digital while still analog, and it confused many people.
Okay.
In fact, it was unheard of
Yes.
for somebody in my sphere
Yes.
to be thinking digital.
So there is hope.
There is hope for many. There is hope for many.
Yes.
And I remember those days when calling over the internet came. Most governments call it an illegal activity.
Yes.
And
In
try
fact,
to
we
shut
used-
it down.
Yes, we used to have businesses that are operating under the waters.
Absolutely.
You know, because they could not say we do calls.
Exactly. And I even know, no names mentioned anywhere,
Yes.
that when it was time, they had to employ and get a digital company, organization, to help them catch the digital people who are making
Who are
calls over the
making calls.
internet.
Is that how we are talking about? Listen, we are talking about analog versus digital. That we are in a season
Yes.
when we have digital mindset
Yes.
colliding
Yes.
with analog.
Absolutely.
All right? The
Yeah.
problem we are having is that as we transition from
Yes.
analog to digital,
Absolutely.
the analog mindsets are the decision makers.
Exactly.
Now, you can imagine this person coming and telling you, now we don't need to do these internet calls.
Exactly.
Go and just get all these companies and shut them down.
And here's the problem. When the government, thinking analog, tries to control economic activity,
Yes.
instead of seeing opportunity in the new economic activity.
Yes.
Because the same government that used to fight against calling over internet, today, because to them, phone calls were the primary business, analog
Yes.
calls.
Yes.
That's what they saw threatened.
The call is in my office. Call me tomorrow at 10 because I will be in my office.
Exactly. And our business is telco. That's what we do.
Okay.
Suddenly they realized people are calling without going through their system. Instead of asking how does that work, analog mind thinks of how do we stop it.
Does that tell us why most of the time, more so in Africa,
Yeah.
why the governments are the last ones to catch up with something?
Absolutely.
Because of the mentalities that are running government.
Yes.
Yeah.
I will not mention a local country in Africa that is shutting down internet during elections, not knowing there are things like VPN.
Yes.
Two different worlds.
I think when you're talking about analog versus digital, even though people who are analog,
Yeah.
they don't sit down with digital and ask.
Exactly.
If I shut down internet during election,
Yes.
is there another way you guys can do it? Because this generation coming up,
They'll find a
will go
solution.
behind your back and
Yeah.
they will have...
You know why? Because analog
Yes.
doesn't reason the way the digital world reasons. The digital world is a world of access to information.
Okay.
So you better change your information, not the access.
Because the information that you're really keeping,
They will access it.
They will access it.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about this. When you talk about, again, analog versus digital,
Yes.
you see things like drones.
Absolutely.
Of course, right now in Africa, many countries will not allow drones. But a time cometh,
Yeah.
that drones will be normal
Well,
activity.
fortunately,
Yes.
some countries, ours included, realized you can't fight
You
technology.
do without the... Yes.
You'd rather license it.
Okay.
When you license technology, now that's the idea of a digital economy. In a digital economy, you look at how to turn something into an economy. Every emerging technology, you look for a process
Yes.
and a place where it adds value and where it can bring revenue.
Not fight it.
If you fight it, it will beat you. We live in a digital world. You can't win. You can't win anymore.
So we are saying that right now, talking about developing countries,
Yes.
coming into the next level is you as a government
Yes.
acknowledging
Yes.
we're in a digital time.
Yes.
We need to catch up.
Absolutely.
We need to acknowledge these things.
Yes.
We need to accept them.
Yeah.
You know?
Network technology has dismantled all artificial barriers.
Yes.
We live in a world today where information, knowledge, even money moves digitally.
Yes.
Assets are no longer physical. Everything is shifting. Services, everything is moving on a digital highway, so to speak. In fact, let's call it a super highway.
Yes.
With no
bumps,
traffic.
No traffic,
Yes.
not all stations.
Yes.
Let's talk about that free global flow again of information.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Yes, you see, the thing is, there is now what used to be, like I said, in an analog world, if you wrote a book, that book, until I get hold of it physically, I don't have it.
Yes.
So there were preservers of knowledge. There were owners of knowledge.
Yes.
So we could have argued that let libraries remain library, and if you want to read this book because it's so important,
You must come here.
you must come here. It became obvious you can't beat digital.
Yes.
So we decided to make it available. And suddenly we began to realize knowledge should not be necessarily paid for. What you do with it is what should be paid for.
Please explain. Because that's where many people are still being beaten. When somebody says, I've written my book and I want my book used in the universities, they must buy the hard copies. I mean, how do you work with that?
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
The value, yes, when you move to digital, there is a way your book can be monetized.
Yes.
But it changes. Now, let's give an example between analog selling of books and digital, and why the old model is crazy. It's called the snail model.
Yes.
The snail model says it will take you X number of days of X copywriters and people to analyze your book and do whatever, get the final print, take it to a printer, they must read the whole book, do everything about it, come back, publish how many copies, transport. I'm tiring you deliberately. I'm just trying to show you how analog works. Now, digital authors work differently. Write a book, email it to the whoever, all the people who are collaborating with you. In real time, while you're writing the rest of it, they're editing parts of it. By the time you arrive at the end of your book, they've proofread all of it.
Yes.
And nowadays, we even have tools that can do that for you,
Oh,
leave
yes.
alone people, analytical tools.
Yes.
Send it to the publisher in real time, have it published, Amazon, whatever, in real time, which means in a week, a book can be completed.
Yes.
So it's not a matter, it took me 3 years to write the book. No, it took you 3 years to research the book. Writing the book does not take 3 years.
Yes.
It's a different story. Then Amazon says, look, we'll only give you $2.
For your book.
Yeah, I only give
which
you $2.
you thought, from an analog mentality,
Yes.
it should go for 10.
Because you're thinking per book.
Yes.
That's your reasoning. You're thinking boxes and cartons.
Yes.
Analog is telling you the difference is this. If you sell it the way you normally would sell it, by the way, Amazon began by selling physical books.
Yes.
People don't know that, and transporting it. It will take you 6 years to be a bestseller. On a digital platform, it will take you 6 minutes to be a bestseller.
Yes.
And it's $2 times 1 million readers, which
Yes.
you'd never have made in your entire life.
Yes.
In the idea of how
So
long
I
you're selling
think
your
it's
books.
a matter of, when you talk about disruptive technologies,
Yes.
talking to the analog and letting them understand you are not losing by
Yes.
becoming digital.
Exactly.
You might be selling it $1,
Yes.
but you're selling to 1 million people
In the
a
shortest
week.
time.
In a week.
Remember we did the
Yes.
last recording? Computerization.
Yes.
Increased speeds.
Yes.
Increased bandwidth. Increased reach. Networking. Real time. We are doing things. I mean, I remember, if you grew up analog, as some of us did, and we
No, I
have a
didn't.
disrupting
No, I
she
didn't.
grew up analog, whatever she tries to tell you. She grew up
Okay.
analog.
Yeah.
What used to happen, we used to be amazed when we watched a program on TV. We didn't know it was 20 years old.
Yes. It just reached us.
It had just reached
Finally,
us.
it has just landed.
So we were impressed. So
Okay.
by the time digital technology shifted and our stars appeared, they were so old.
I think also what was disruptive was you've been watching this young person,
Yes.
and then you get this news 6 months later that this person passed on.
Yeah.
And they passed on at 90. And you're like, okay, wait, who are we watching? Okay, I'm just exaggerating.
one of those...
But they were old.
Yeah, one of those case in points,
Yes.
anybody who's watched Sound of Music, we loved it until we saw the cast.
Yes.
And we realized how old they were.
Thank God for technology. Thank God for technology.
And so that's the difference.
But we're talking about shifting strategies. And
Yes.
let's look at nations with aging population
Yes.
and a declining birth rate. Let's talk
Now
about that.
that is a
Aging
serious
population.
thing. Declining birth rate.
Yes.
Those are real nations. They are nations who, in their great strategic planning, had reduced, because of economic structure and everything they did, they began to manage the childbirth.
Yes.
They began to manage everything. They developed, they became powerfully economic nations. What has happened is that Years later, they've realized that their population is majority older
Older.
than younger.
Yes.
That already means that the majority is analog. All right?
Yes.
So the reasoning of that, because it's your country, you can't establish certain technologies because they will not find use. All right? So in those technologies, the most important things are things like retirement.
That's what they talk, healthcare.
Healthcare.
Yes.
You know, that's what you invest in. And so suddenly you realize you didn't think ahead. We talked about thinking ahead.
Yes.
And it never struck you that you will have an entire generation retiring at the same time.
And there's a generational gap.
Yes.
Because now we are saying that if a country has majority old people,
Yes.
there is definitely a gap.
Exactly.
And again, we are saying that if you are an analog, you as a government are saying we do not allow people, we do not, immigration rules are so stiff.
Yes.
Now you're coming to a place where you're begging countries,
Yeah, please come.
give us your people.
Please
we
come.
are looking
because
for
we
this.
can't give birth on time
Oh, yes.
to close the gap.
You won't birth and raise and train.
It's impossible.
Yes.
Now, such governments are finding themselves in a new crisis. When you have a large, and you might wonder how this affects you. If you want to invest in a country with this demographic, you have to know about it.
Yes.
Otherwise, your powerful product might be useless. This is the whole idea. So what happens, you have a scenario where you have that age group, okay?
Yes.
The problem is that now with that age group, you are now reducing the people who can work to keep that economy going. That economy was run by this age group
Yes.
that is retiring. Now you have a new problem. The problem of paying them their benefits and now taking care of them. And so what some governments have resorted to, maybe if you watch news, and you need to start watching international news
Oh, yes.
to see how it affects you, is you'll see many governments, there are strikes by elderly people. You wonder, why would elderly people go on strike? Because the government wants to extend retirement age.
Oh, yes.
Because they don't have the money.
Because when you talk about 60 being the retirement age,
Yes.
and you have this whole population coming to you, you now get wiser and say, listen, let's make it 70.
Yes.
Or whatever age. Why? We are trying to push
Exactly.
because we cannot afford to retire all of them at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah?
And the only way you do that, you start encouraging healthcare.
Yes.
Eat well. You don't want people dying on you.
Yes.
You want everybody to arrive.
You realize when you talk about this is a problem. It's
It's
actually
real.
a problem. Now listen, when you talk about the young people in Africa,
Yes.
research says that in the next 30 years, majority of African population
Yes.
will be the youth.
Yes.
And the youth here is 35.
Yes.
Not the youth of 55.
And that youth
Yes.
will be more than 60 or 70% of the world's population.
Say that again, because we're in Africa, talking to African business people,
Yes.
more so the kingdom business people.
Yes.
So that when we talk about planning
Yes.
and seeing ahead,
Yes.
like Joseph,
Yep.
you can now start planning, knowing very well. 30 years.
Yep.
The
Most
problem-
people don't know that by 2050, yeah, that's how far we have to think, Africa will have the largest population in the world.
Yes.
In the world. Think of the implication.
Yes.
Now, majority of Africa is being run by analog leaders. Do you think they are ready?
They are not.
You see, we keep saying we need to change the leaders. Listen, you can play musical chairs with all the analog leaders you want.
There will be no change.
Same result.
There will be no change.
Same result.
And that is why we said earlier,
Yes.
woe unto you if you are a digital
Yes.
young person,
Yes.
thinking analog.
analog.
Because even if we elect you, you're taking us back
Thank you.
to the same problem.
Actually, majority of young people who actually run in politics spend time being nurtured analog.
Yes. That they don't prepare for digital.
So by the time they arrive at the top of politics,
Yes.
they are just a new, efficient version of analog.
A younger
A
analog.
younger version
You
of
know?
analog.
And let's talk about this, especially
Yes.
what we said about Africa,
Yeah.
having the highest population of
Yes.
the young people.
Yes.
Now, right now, when we talk of Africa,
Yes.
when we see our population, it's actually a problem.
Absolutely.
You can feed them,
Yeah.
you can take them to school. Now think, if you are a nation in the West that has older population, do you realize they will educate Africa?
There's no
Because
option.
they need you.
There's no option.
Then tomorrow, what do you say? We
Yes.
have scholarships.
Absolutely.
Take them.
They're
Because
everywhere. They need you.
know, they need you.
Now, what has happened,
Yeah.
contrary to people's thinking, COVID has been a blessing
Oh, yes, it
to
is.
Africa. And I'll explain why. Simple reason. We used to wait for governments to take for us schools in the villages. See how we think? bring the school, not education.
Give us a school.
There's a difference.
Yes.
Our focus was schools. Our focus was never education. All right? Now, that became a predicament. Politicians promise forever. They know they'll never do it, but we keep electing them. The business environment also runs under that, analog business. Because some of you are waiting for the schools to reopen so you can go back to supplying milk and supplying bread. Because you can't think outside that.
Outside of that.
You can't reason outside of that model. And so that model becomes a problem. Now with COVID, what happens? A new disruption. Who said you must go to school to go to school?
You can have homeschooling.
Remember what we said, disruption.
Yes.
New technologies, speed, all those things are issues.
Yes.
So a digital thinking government will say, we don't need to spread schools. We need to spread technology. It's cheaper.
Because education, like you say, there's a very big difference between going to school and getting an education.
Simple.
Most of the African analog, let me say, mentality leaders emphasized we go to school.
Thank you.
Not to get an education.
Nobody cares.
But to pass through school.
You went through school. Not understanding that school was designed to keep you for 4 years while they think about what to do.
With next.
Or 6 years. Because there's nowhere to take you.
Yeah.
Now, if we shift to another way of thinking, where we move away from building the school, but take infrastructure to our villages, take technology, allow children, they'll never stop learning. School is no longer a place.
And it becomes fun.
School becomes a life.
And people realize this is our life.
Yes.
This is not something we do for 10 years.
Absolutely.
This is something we do for life.
And what has happened? The technology developers have come to a realization. They need people who know how to use the technology.
Yes.
So they are offering you free education.
So talk of open source now.
Yes.
That is where when you come to Africa and you find still analog mentality.
Yep.
Because I invested in your business, I'm insisting we must sell.
Exactly.
You are telling me as a digital innovator that no, we need to be open sourced.
Yes.
You know?
So that everybody can use this to develop more resources, which in the end develops more business. In the end, business is what people want, not jobs. In other words, if I have a business, I have created jobs.
Yes.
If I'm looking for a job, then how many people are not going to get jobs? Because let's do some simple maths. That's why I thought that's why we went to school. We went to school that tells you very simply. Have you ever played musical chairs? Most of our education systems across Africa is like musical chairs of 100 people with 10 seats. Try that game. There's going to be people breaking people's legs. There's going to be people doing whatever. Why? Because we are told primary school, 100 million people. High school can only take 50 million.
Yes.
University can take 10 million, and jobs can take 1 million. Show me the math.
It's not working. And that is why we are saying that when you talk about socio-geopolitical shifts and their impact, looking at nations, developing nations.
Exactly.
Let's talk about that. When you talk about developing nations with faster growing and younger
populations. So their solution must be different. They must start upgrading education models, not schools.
Here we are talking about, remember, we have not lost our narrative.
Yes.
We are talking about kingdom business.
Yes.
How you have to come and think that this is a developing nation. It has a faster growing and younger population. What do they need? Number one, you're talking about
education models. Education models means what does the future look like? Who do we need? How do we prepare them? Simple.
That's the education we're talking about.
That's the education we're talking about.
So you are saying also, when you talk about this kingdom business person sitting here, looking at the future and seeing that we can tell that Africa, yes, we have the highest population in the next 30 years.
Absolutely.
But we are saying that the West will need 1, 2, 3. So what do we need in Africa? Now, I should stop investing based on what I knew, but based on what I know now.
Absolutely.
Okay?
And we have to stop exporting slaves.
Let's talk about that.
We have to stop that. You see, in the past, the West took slaves from Africa. Now Africa is exporting slaves.
Willingly.
Willingly.
We are all lining up for visas, but we don't realize we are going as slaves. And that's what we started by saying, that the first thing this developing nation need is upgrade educational models.
Yes. Who told you the West needs more waiters? Who told you they need more nurses? After a while, there'll be no aging population. Because that's the only reaction we know.
Yes.
Those economies need sophistication, thinking, reasoning. So how many people go out to the West to work in those jobs? Very few.
Yes.
And that's a mindset we have to stop. It's called exporting slaves. Because we didn't prepare them. Our education models, what happens? Remember the funnel I spoke about?
Yes.
As the funnel throws people out, primary, everything,
Yes.
those are the slaves that you now send out.
Yes.
But had they been taught something different, they'd be going out because there's a demand for them.
Yes.
So that they're not going to survive or to hide in the systems. But they are going to function because they are needed.
Yes.
Until we start thinking like that.
So as a developing nation, you are saying,
Yes.
the first thing, when you're looking at the future,
Yes.
let's think of the young people today.
What
so
are they
looking at
thinking?
that 5-year-old, you're
Yes.
talking about how do we start an educational system,
Thank
a
you.
model that this person will thrive.
Yes.
By the time the future comes, that future we are talking about,
Absolutely.
this person is ready.
Simple. How
Yeah.
many of you are teaching your 7-year-olds to think? That's a simple question.
Yes.
Because we don't. It doesn't fit. All the professional training organizations we have train managers, not leaders.
Yeah.
Think about it.
So I think we are talking about that. When you talk of disruption,
Yes.
this is what we are talking about.
Absolutely.
That Africa, we are coming to a place where we are stopping training managers
Yes.
and start training leaders.
Absolutely.
And leaders here is not one who leads in a corporation or organization.
No.
Is one who comes up
To chart a pathway.
to chart.
To create a place people can follow them to.
That is a leader.
Even our terminology for leader is analog. It has to be removed.
Yes. Actually, that's why I wanted you to talk about that.
It's removed.
Yes.
Our model of leader means somebody who's fought their way to the top, who is lording over and controlling everybody else.
Now we are talking about somebody who is charting a path.
A path that people can follow.
And he has vision. He can
Yes.
see into the future.
Yes.
He can see what will be in demand
Absolutely.
in 10 years, in 20, in 30 years. Now, talking about education
Yes.
models,
Yes.
creating employment,
Yes.
and providing effective health and care systems.
Of course.
Yeah.
Now, what does that mean? Let's take two issues. One, when we talk about creating employment is not jobs in government.
Yes.
Creating employment is creating a nation of entrepreneurs who, as they develop things, automatically what they develop will require others. And that becomes an efficient system.
Yes.
So the government should be training young people to create jobs, not promising them jobs.
Not promising them jobs. And again, as a government, we are saying that the government should not work on infrastructure.
Simple.
Where you empower these young people
To do well.
to have a platform where they
Yes.
can do well.
I mean, you tell me, if you take fiber into the village and power into the village and a road into the village, watch.
They will not ask for jobs.
Watch.
They will create jobs.
Of course.
They will create jobs, yeah.
It's as simple as that. Infrastructure is the problem. So that should be the focal point, not jobs.
Yes.
I don't know why people said government should create jobs. That's analog thinking. Government should create opportunities, not jobs.
Yes.
Because that's how innovation and creativity increases and becomes better and better.
Yes.
Now, talking about effective health systems. Effective health system is not anticipating sickness. Because most of us think, give us more hospitals. In other words, let's get sicker and sicker.
Yes.
Effective health systems means teaching people nutrition. In fact, the greatest schoolmaster is called COVID.
Yes.
Our hospitals are now at 12 capacity. Why? Because people are hygienic. 90% of sickness was unhygienic behavior.
Talking about health systems, the
Yes.
government should be teaching
Yes.
health awareness campaigns.
and infrastructure and taking care of the garbage and the things that cause trouble. Don't
Yes.
wait for people to get sick so that you can do business. But you see, because analog business was based on problems.
Yes.
You know, it's interesting that the generation I grew up in marketing, we trained people and we told them that the work of a marketer is to solve problems. Now we are changing. The work of an innovator is to create solutions. An entirely different ballgame.
So your mind, your sight is on
Yes.
a solution
Yeah.
based
And your solution shouldn't be a reaction to problems.
Okay.
Your solution should be betterment of life.
That's why we are talking about Joseph, and we say that Joseph foresaw something,
Yes.
and he now came up with a solution.
Exactly.
So if you found him doing his innovation and his technologies of
Yes.
the day, it was based on something he has seen.
Absolutely.
Still talking about social geopolitical shift
Yes.
and impact.
Yep.
How are we going to handle this? How are we going to navigate this as kingdom
Yes.
business people?
Aha.
This is business unusual. Keep tracking.